From the beautiful Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, this is the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. We take questions from anyone in the dental profession and discuss what it takes to win not only in dentistry, but in life. Business, leadership, relationships, parenting, health and wellness, money management, nothing is off limits on the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. I'm Jason Tenori, your host, and have over 20 years of experience to pull from. Learn from my mistakes and let me help you collapse time so you can become the best version of yourself. Yo, welcome back. Dr. Jason here, Dental Lighthouse Podcast, and I am not going to bore you today with a solo episode of me just kind of doing some ramblings and some musings. Instead, today I'm actually going to bring you value, and I am super excited to have one of the most prominent dental lawyers in the space, Mr. Rob Montgomery, on the podcast. Mr. Montgomery has a very popular podcast himself, the Dental Amigos podcast, which he does with everyone's favorite nacho dentist, Dr. Paul Goodman. And he does a lot of work for clients in the dental acquisition, merger, partnership, dental space. He can be found at yourdentallawyer.com. He's a great resource for me. I've reached out to him a number of times to just get some advice for not only me, but for a lot of my coaching clients. And I'm excited to have him on today and just kind of drop a bunch of questions that I'm tremendously underqualified to answer, but I do get asked quite a bit. So instead of fudging the answers, I thought best to bring on the expert. So Rob, thank you for joining the podcast. And how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Jason. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And it seems like when I'm working with coaching clients or even people that podcast listeners, they call and ask me these random questions outside of my scope of expertise. They're usually around the same two or three kind of core topics. So if it's okay with you, I think we just unpack both or all three of those and you kind of share some wisdom, share some knowledge with me specifically, and then obviously with our listeners, and then we kind of see where the conversation goes. You cool with that?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So one of the questions I get asked quite a bit is the doc that's decided to scale, what a lot of these experts call the emerging DSO or emerging group practice. They got maybe two locations, maybe a third. And the question I get like literally weekly is, should I form a DSO? My accountant's telling me it's a waste of money, but I'm hearing from other dental experts on podcasts and stuff that I should be doing this. Jason, what's your advice? So I'm sure you need additional context, but how are you answering that question and what is it based off of?
Yeah. So a lot of it is based off of what the game plan is as far as associates and will you be bringing on partners. And so a lot of times in that structure, these dentist owners want to retain their associates. And the best way to do that is by making them partners. So if you're thinking your model is going to be some sort of joint venture with your associate on a partnership situation in the particular location where that associate is working, we're probably going to want to have a DSO structure. So you would have a parent DSO, which is the big DSO that provides the actual management services. And then they are going to have sub DSOs, which are DSOs that are just managing that one location. And that's typically where you would partner with your associate at that sub DSO level. So if you're thinking about bringing on associate partners, multiple locations, the answer is probably yes, DSO, but probably with like another layer too with the sub DSO structure, which is what even large and experienced DSOs do when they're entering into these equity arrangements with associates. So that's sort of one thing. That's sort of one of the first questions I would ask somebody. What is your plan as far as partners in equity? And then the other thing is once you start to get to a certain size, it starts to get unwieldy to have employees of different PLLCs, that there might be a benefit to bringing all that under one umbrella to have a DSO where all the employees, the non-clinical employees are being paid, benefits are being administered. You may have some economies of scale with that.
Awesome. So I want to just touch on the last point that you made. Let's assume that a doctor is growing a group, has no intentions of bringing on partners, but has all the intentions of scaling. That last point that you made, are you suggesting that by having some type of management company DSO set up and by having non-clinicians employed and paid from that entity, there is some type of financial benefit, albeit like a tax savings or something that would benefit the owner versus just continuing to do what they do without that management company?
Yeah, I don't know how much of a tax savings. It just might make it easier to administer the business, and that also depends on how they own these practices. So, if some group practices have one PLLC that owns all the locations, if that's the case, and you're a dentist and you're not thinking about bringing on partners, you probably don't need the DSO. But if you have a separate PLLC owning each location, that's where it might be nice, just instead of having nine different, groups of W-2s and employees working for all these different places. And then one employee maybe is submitting insurance claims for these three offices, but not those. It would potentially streamline things to bring it under that one umbrella.
Awesome. You had referenced DSO and then sub DSOs, which kind of leads me. I think what you're alluding to is where is ownership, right? So it's my understanding that there's really two choices. There's ownership at the clinical level, or what you called
Mm-hmm.
sub DSO, and then ownership at the management company level. So it sounds like, based on what you advise clients, that most of that equity for partners is at the sub DSO level. Is that just a philosophy of your firm, or are you trying to determine what's in the best interest of the group to determine if equity is going to be at the management company level or at the clinical level?
I think that most clients would like to see it at the clinical level. I think one of the compelling reasons for bringing a partner on is because you want that person to have skin in the game and for them to be invested in the outcome of that particular location. So if they have equity in the location where they're working, then that location does well. They make more money. It becomes more valuable. There's a direct correlation there, as opposed to if they have equity at the parent DSO level, then the impact of their contribution, for better or for worse, is not is correlated.
One of the one of the common issues that's often brought to me is an emerging group, and they've already set up their structure to be a DSO and then sub DSO, like you alluded to.
Mm-hmm.
And equity is offered at the clinical level, let's say 70-30,
Mm-hmm.
where the founder visionary dentist owns 70% and the younger doc owns 30%. There always seems to be a lack of clarity with um, free cash flow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how are you typically structuring or recommending how the newly minted partner gets paid? Is it like do you try to make sure that arrangements are in line where, okay, we have $50,000 of free cash flow at the end of the quarter, but there's debt payments, there's tax payments that are going to be due. We want to dump money into an emergency fund, and that's the mindset of one doc, and the other doc's like, it's cash, it's ours. I want to take a full distribution. Like, how do you maintain clarity on that stuff before it becomes a problem?
Yeah. So to just cut back up for a second, there's a couple of components to how that associate's making money. One is they still have an employment agreement where they're getting paid, probably a percentage of their collections. So then we're talking about splitting the profit over and above that. And it really depends on what the client wants and kind of what their overall mission and goals are. Generally, though, we're going to have that set up where the majority doctor has the say in what happens with those decisions, and that would normally be what is known as a manager managed LLC. So and there's really two things at play. I mean, if they own 70%, but 70-30, they're always going to outvote them. So they've got a majority to begin with, almost a super majority, really. But in addition, that founding doc is the quote unquote manager of that LLC. That doesn't mean the manager of the practice, but that means that they make the decisions in the operating agreement as to how and when to distribute cash flow and what they think are appropriate reserves, how to spend money, how much money to borrow, things like that. So we're generally leaving a whole lot of control with the founding doctor. So it's really kind of like a benevolent dictatorship,
Yeah, yeah.
honestly. And so, but there needs to be enough cash flow for the associate doc, the partner doc, to be able to service the debt they probably incurred in connection with that buy-in. And so a founder in that situation, if they're going to be, they should probably think about being reasonable in that regard. Because if you're going to bring all these people on as partners and then you're going to squeeze them financially, you're probably, it's counterproductive to what the goal is here. Like you want this to be a good thing for them, and you want them to make money and be happy and help you to make more money and grow these practices. So making life difficult for them so they can't pay their debt is not the avenue to that.
So I don't know if it's dentists, because dentists are weird, right? Paul be the first to tell you that.
He tells me that all the time. He's like,
Yeah, they are. They're nuts. It's like it's so weird. Like you're not human. You're not thinking rationally, but it's how dentists think. I'm a huge Dave Ramsey fan, and he's famous for saying that the only ship that will consistently sink is a partnership. So he's obviously not a fan of them. So just curious, like based
yeah.
on your lived experience, like what are the two or three most common reasons that you have seen partnerships just really go south?
Yeah, I mean it's like any partnership or any relationship, any marriage. Money is the biggest problem, or the lack thereof, and that sort of manifests itself in a few different ways. I'll say first off, the problem, the mistake that people make on both sides, if they're the one bringing on the partner or they're the joining partner, is they don't do the right financial due diligence, right projections, and the cash flow projections. And they say, okay, you want to be a partner? For $500,000, you can own 25% of this. Okay, great. I do that. And if they don't go and work with a CPA, preferably a dental focused CPA that understands the business and how these things get structured, if they don't understand what that means to them from a cash flow standpoint, then they're just taking what's behind door number two. And then they find out 6 months later after they've done this deal, well, was this a great thing for me? Was this just okay? Was it neutral? Am I losing money? And then flip that with the partner, or they're bringing on the partner, the existing owner. If they think, well, yeah, I'm going to bring on this partner and share 50% of my profit with them, and I'm going to work less and make more money. Okay, that's not probably going to happen either. So it's like it's a lack of sort of understanding, a lack of proper planning from a legal, practical, and even more so financial standpoint. Because if you go into this and one partner 6 months later is like, wow, this deal sucks. Like, you now have a winner and a loser. And there aren't many relationships where one partner benefits at the expense of the other that are, built to last. So if you have a spouse and, two spouses, and one works and busts their tail and makes money, and the other one spends all that money and more, and they don't work, like, that's probably not gonna last, for the long haul. So like I would say, like, that's a big thing. Just the failure to really properly plan, to have proper expectations, because this is truly the transaction where it needs to be a win-win. It's a partnership. This is a seesaw, and if it's just tipped too much one way or the other, it's not going to be good. So that's a big thing. Where and I feel like when we have somebody, even though I'm not representing the other side, I want to make sure the other side understands what they're signing themselves up for, and they're comfortable with it before they do it, because these things are very, very difficult to unwind. So that's a big mistake, I guess, Jason, that does lead to dissension and problems. And then sort of also along the lines with money, kind of two other related things. uh, the different sort of fiscal practices and habits. So, if there are two docs and one thinks there should be a $25,000 holiday party, and the other one thinks that all the supplies should be bought at Costco, nothing wrong with either of those things. They're probably not ideal partners. And then
Right.
the other thing that we've seen is there are some partners that want to be aggressive with taxes and things that they run through the business, and others that want to make sure that every I is dotted and T crossed. Again, nothing wrong with either of those things, but they're sort of different philosophies that eventually are going to kind of run up against each other in a way that may not be productive for the long haul.
And those last two examples that you gave, I mean, it's got to be nearly impossible to unpack those in some type of contractual agreement, right? It's almost got to be
Yeah,
like a philosophy or an understanding ahead of time, right?
it is. It is.
Yeah.
I mean, this is it's like the dating period. You have to be realistic with the person that you're considering doing this with, and do it for the right reasons. You should do it because it makes economic sense, and this is a good business partnership, a good business combination. So there should be a compelling reason for it. Just generally, the fact that you were friends in dental school is not a compelling reason to be partners.
Right.
That's a
Right.
good reason not to be partners. I mean, the number one way to kill a friendship is a bad partnership. But just being realistic and talking about talking about these things. I mean, with anything, Jason, we put things in agreements to basically protect sort of the what ifs, sort of I wouldn't say last ditch resort, but it kind of is, like what happens if things start to fall apart? You've got this document that is really the ticket to a lawsuit, so to speak. But like we can't, as lawyers with documents, we can't make bad partnerships good. From an economic standpoint, from a cash flow standpoint, or a relationship standpoint. Like the things that really make the difference aren't the things that can be legislated in a contract. So like sometimes people say like, "Oh, Rob, I don't trust this guy. Make sure I have a good contract." Like, whoa, whoa, whoa. If you don't trust this person, we shouldn't be doing a contract. We're doing a contract for the person that you trust, that for some reason something's gone wrong, and now we need this contract. Like,
Right.
I don't have that power, like there's nothing in
Right.
this
Right.
agreement that's going to do that. So I think it is important to have those sort of soft conversations about, how do you feel? Like, do you think, are we going to try to expand? Are we going to have, two practices or 10? Are we going to take on a lot of debt? Or, it's like, hey, how many kids do you want to have? None. 10. Like, okay, maybe we shouldn't get married, And so those things. And I think, and sometimes it's hard to have those conversations. They are the quote unquote the difficult conversations, but that's really what the stuff that needs to be discussed, and feel like you're on that same page, going the same direction.
Awesome. That was a super good answer. And it just, I think it'll make a lot of people like really think about what they're looking for before they start to engage in these types of relationships. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about like an outright acquisition, right? I'm
Mhm.
assuming that a lot of your work is either representing a seller or a buyer that's sees a practice for sale, and they want to ultimately purchase it, and there's some type of transition, and then the senior doc rides off into the sunset, and the young doc tries to take things over. Um, I'm curious, selfishly, from a perspective of acquiring these practices, as someone like me that's debt funded versus private equity or DSOs, like how can the little guy like me or some of these other docs compete with private equity when it comes to competing for this particular acquisition? Like what like obviously I don't think we can compete on purchase price. Because typically it's been my understanding that private equity is going to throw more money at the problem. But do you have like principles or pillars that you're telling your young client that's trying to acquire a practice of what they can bring to the table that private equity can't? What does that conversation look like?
Yeah, and that's hard because the buyer doesn't really have the opportunity to get to the seller when that decision's being made. So a lot of times people have decided that this is the type of buyer that they want before the practices even hit the market. So it's not
Oh,
like,
okay.
like often. And now this has changed a little bit. So let's just back up a little bit. So I don't entirely agree that the DSO deals are always better, or that sometimes the valuations look better, but typically, like if we'll see deals, it's not uncommon to see like, oh, a DSO valuation that is practice valued at $6 million. That doesn't mean that the seller's getting $6 million. Okay, so they might be getting $3.5 million of cash, and then there might be some escrow holdback. They're going to get $2 million of equity in Bugs Bunny DSO, which is who knows what that's worth. Maybe nothing. There have not been a lot of recapitalizations in recent years with DSOs, so it's not when DSOs say, "Oh yeah, we're going to pay this, and this is all going to be in Bugs Bunny, equity, and you're going to get a second bite of the apple," and it's like you just bought a lottery ticket. Like that hasn't been happening, and so when you really peel back the layers on those deals, they're not so good, Jason. And there was a few years ago where we were saying like, hey, anybody that's got a practice that's grossing, over $1.5 million, they probably have to sell to a DSO because for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, the DSO deals were really still strong then. Maybe you're looking at 80% cash, just 20% equity, and there's some other things that were more favorable. But that has gotten the structure of those deals is a lot worse. So that people in that range probably not only do they now have an option of selling to a dentist, a private dentist, it's probably going to be better for them too. Because not to mention too, like even if you walk away after you pay taxes on your sale with, let's just say, $2 million in cash, and forget that equity. The equity needs to be the cherry on top. You got to like what you walk away from the table with, period. And if you don't count on that. So after you look at walking away with just say you net $2 million after you've paid taxes, and now you have to work for that DSO for the next 5 years. And the delta between being an owner and an associate is $400,000 a year. I'm keeping the math really easy for myself here, Jason. That's $2 million. So even though you walked away with $2 million, you went to work for 5 more years of this practice, you're still probably solving most of the problems and the headaches on a daily basis. And now you essentially have broken even, from a cash flow standpoint. So like those deals just don't look as good. So where it used to be like that 1.5 million range of revenue was like kind of where you kind of had no choice. It was better to work to the DSO. That number has really moved up significantly. So now it's like 3, 4, maybe in some cases $5 million. You still may be able and might be better off selling to a private dentist. So along with that, what has happened while those DSO deals have gotten worse, a lot of the dental focused lenders have really loosened the strings and are willing to lend a lot more for individual practices than they ever were. And we've seen deals where people have gotten $5 and $6 million of bank financing to buy a practice. A single doc buying a practice. So like that. So those opportunities, which used to be sort of a limiting factor for somebody that had a practice, like do I sell to a DSO or do I sell to a dentist? Well, the dentist is only going to be able to pay me 75% of my gross, and that's not so good. That's not the case anymore. We've seen deals that trade at 105% of gross. So those deals have gotten better. The problem with, like I said, though, for a buyer who's now finds themselves competing, which I don't think they should, is really education. Most owners, an owner, I should say, who has been properly advised and educated on what these DSO transactions are and are not, it should probably be very receptive to an offer from a doc, like I'm talking about, for those reasons, because it doesn't have the risk, it doesn't have all the nonsense, it doesn't have the earnouts, the equity, which the equity is completely illiquid. Like you can't sell it. It may not. Who knows even what it's going to be worth. So the that educated seller, if they really get what they've got and they haven't fallen prey to the unsolicited offer where the DSO sends this thing like, hey, we value this at $8 million. I'm rich. I don't have to worry about it. Like if those people have done the right things, which a lot of people don't, Jason, it's sort of like there's a reason why those unsolicited offers come in. And they're like, well, you don't have to pay a broker. Like, oh, great. I saved the money on a broker. So now I'm just going to give away my practice essentially.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so if those people if they understand what it is and what it isn't, they should be considering that. But again, these buyers don't have the ability to get to that seller because they don't even know who the seller is if they've already been sort of, we'll say, the victim of an unsolicited offer from a DSO.
Man, such great points. And sometimes I am weary about the conversation levels that we have on this podcast because what you just shared over the last few minutes is unbelievably valuable to people that understand what you said and know how to use it, versus like people that are 5 or 6 years away from like understanding kind of what you said. And I'll just verify what you just said. I'm in the process of signing an LOI now with a big practice, $2 million practice, and had a number of private equity DSO deals. But to your point, 60% cash at close, 3 to 5 year employment agreement, and with no idea what's going to happen with interest rates. This Bugs Bunny DSO, I mean, who knows what it's going to be worth, if anything, in a couple of years. So
Yeah.
my offer came in significantly lower, um, roughly the same amount of money, cash at closing, but that was for 100% of the practice,
Mm-hmm.
with like a 6 month employment agreement, and just determining, what the seller wants. I think is super important. So yeah, totally agree with everything that you just said. I just wish that people like myself, debt funded dentists, not private equity funded dentists, could have
Mm-hmm.
access to the seller before they start to drink the Kool-Aid of private equity, and make a decision that they may regret.
Yeah, yeah, it's a tricky thing. And a lot of it really hinges on the broker. And if they're working with a broker that is good and really looking out for their best interest, they're going to tell them everything that I just told you. Or if they're working with a broker who's really just trying to make a buck, and so and there's nothing wrong with trying to make a buck, but you have to understand whether or not that's good advice. And I think it's important to work with your team of financial advisors, your CPA, to help you understand what these transactions are. Because frankly, and again, not to throw shade at brokers, we've got great relationships with really good ones around the country. But if they're getting paid 8% on that $8 million valuation, that includes $3 million of Bugs Bunny DSO equity, like that's a better commission for them,
No doubt.
and so there is that sort of I'd say conflict of interest, but competing interest for sure as to what's in that doc's best interest. But I think what sellers overall have to understand, and say this to you as a buyer, Jason, because this is, if you're in that situation where you are in a competitive bidding situation where you have the ability to talk to that seller, is it's important for the sellers to understand that multiple EBITDA, the multiple of EBITDA, the valuation, all that stuff isn't as important. They need to appreciate the structure of the deal and really what that is going to mean to them from an outcome standpoint. And a lot of people skip that step, and it becomes somewhat of an ego thing. Like, I got a 7 times multiple, I got a 6 times multiple. Like that's like meaningless. Like, yeah,
Right.
you got a 7 times multiple, and you had to take 45% of equity. Like, that's not, who cares,
Right.
right?
Right.
Versus
Right.
somebody got that, like a 5 times multiple might be a better deal. It's not as impressive when you're playing golf with your buddies on a Friday afternoon bragging about your multiples, right? But that's like, the people that understand that stuff and have been properly advised, like they get it. And so if you're in that situation as a buyer, I think, you have to encourage these people, like, hey, you really need to get under the hood with what that competing offer is and what it isn't. You look at the cash flow. After you take this hit, continue to work for all these years, and pay your taxes and walk away with this cash. Like, are you doing any better? And frankly, is this the way you want the last 5 years of your career as a dentist to go? Working for a DSO, and some DSOs are fine to work for. Some are great, some aren't. And that's the other thing too. With all this stuff, we talk about DSOs as though it's this monolith, and it's not. There are some that are fine. There's some that are complete garbage,
Yeah.
But so that's what I would say. If I'm in that situation, if I were you, that they're the talking points, and if that seller doesn't know what this deal looks like to them from a cash flow standpoint, as far as like the cost and lost opportunity as an associate, and after they pay the taxes and the broker fee and all that stuff, if they don't know what that number is, they should find that number out, because again, very often these days that number is not higher than the number that you are offering them as a private dentist.
Do you find yourself struggling with your own clients to advise them on the difference? Because I love that you use the word ego, because they're holding out for this 7x, 8x multiple, and they finally got it offered to them, and
Mhm.
they have blinders on with the rest of the deal, but all they can see is I'm getting 8x. Like, do you find those conversations to be difficult to have, where your client's not receptive, or are they pretty receptive to it and they'll ultimately do what you advise?
It all depends. Yeah. Some people listen, some people don't,
Right.
and I don't stop. I will challenge my clients repeatedly. Let's get the CPA here. I want to see a cash flow. Did you work with your CPA? What's the cash flow look like? They told me it
Yeah.
looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. Okay. That's like saying what the menu at that restaurant looked pretty good. Like, that's not an answer.
Right.
I want to know, if you sell for this, do this deal, and with this cash and this rollover equity, pay taxes, pay off your debt, and go to work for them for 5 years. I want to know what that looks like. I want the
Right.
number. Tell me the number. And until they tell me that number, I continue to badger them with that. And there are
Good.
some that still, they don't want to hear it. There are sometimes we've had situations where, they're reluctant, and they finally get somebody involved. We had a deal years ago with a younger practice owners that had 4 or 5 practices in the Southeast, specialty practices. And they had a sibling that was working for a CPA firm that we actually do a lot of our dental work with and collaborate with. And they just didn't want to reach out to them. And finally they did, and came back and was like, well, here it is. And they laid it out. Here's the spreadsheet. And these guys were they were making roughly, I forget, like, let's just say like $900,000 a year as partners. And after they did this deal, even though it was like a $13 million valuation, they were going to be making $275,000 a year as associate dentists. And they were going to, after they paid their taxes, were walking away with like $1.8 million each. Like, that was a lousy deal. And it was almost
Right.
like we were doing like a card trick, Jason. Yeah, it was like,
Right.
we had the spreadsheet. Like, how could that be? Like, no, is this number right? Is that number? It's all right. Like, they were just in disbelief. And nobody wants to sell a successful business and then turn around and say, hey, guess what? We can't take a family vacation, and we have to like get rid of a car. Why? Because
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
just sold our business. And so it varies from people to people. Some people, just like anything, Jason, are more coachable and the more receptive to advice. Some people just want to be told, that what they're doing is the right thing. We don't do
Right.
that. It's not. We're going to be advising and telling people, and ultimately clients make their own decisions. But
No doubt.
that this is such an important thing. And as I was talking about earlier too, like, for us, with just about every decision that our clients bring to us that has any kind of economic ramifications, selling your practice to a DSO, bringing on a partner, doing the JV thing, coming on as a partner, hiring an associate. Like, I challenge them, like, what does this mean to you? What is this going to look like? Let's see what the cash flow projections are, and that's going to guide the decision. Because we as lawyers can't make a bad deal good. And what makes a bad deal is the economics weren't good, and the economics aren't good because somebody got into a transaction without fully availing themselves and understanding what those are. And sometimes people will come to us too, Jason, are like, oh, I don't know what to do. I can't figure out whether I should bring a partner on or not. And like, well, okay, this is easy. Let's just look at the numbers and let's look at what this would possibly be worth. Let's see how much money you're going to make or how much money you're going to lose. And then it's like, wow, it's like this epiphany. Like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's horrible. Okay, well then stop beating yourself up, right? Or like, that sounds great. Sign me up. Okay, let's do it. It's the decision somewhat makes itself when you have all the data that enables you to make it.
Yeah, such a good point. I have that conversation a lot with my clients where I don't want you to be driven by just money, but if you're not sure, like looking at the money component of it, looking at the cash flow, looking at the profitability, looking at what this cash flows out over the next few years really can help you kind of guide your decision. Again, it shouldn't be the only factor, but it's got to be like a really, really important one for sure.
Yeah, I agree. It shouldn't be the only factor, but if it's not going to be good, like you certainly need to know it going in, right? Nobody wants to do these deals to lose money.
I got one more question. I so appreciate your time, and I know you're super busy. Just another question that I get asked a ton, and just curious to hear your opinion. And I'm pretty sure I know Paul's opinion on this, but I disregard Paul's opinion routinely. I have lost prospective associates, because in my initial contract offering to them, there was no crystal clear path to equity. There was no like, in 6 months, this is what'll happen. In 12 months, this is what'll happen. And instead, I use language like, we will evaluate partnership in 6 months, and give some ambiguous, subjective language in there. As an advisor to both dentists that own the practice, and I'm assuming young dentists that are looking for associateships, where do you land on what that should look like for a prospective associate to join a practice?
Yeah, that language in an employment agreement does need to be somewhat loosey goosey, because you really can't have an enforceable promise or an enforceable agreement as to equity in the contract, because there's so many variables. Unless you say, in 1 year, we agree that we are going to sign this purchase agreement that's attached here to as Exhibit A, that has this purchase price, and that we're going to sign this partnership agreement that's attached here to as Exhibit B. Those documents are completely negotiated at the time that somebody is coming on as an associate, when neither party even knows whether or not this is going to be a good fit. Unless you do that, then it's not an enforceable promise. And so, it really can't be anything beyond what you're saying. I mean, what we've seen, and this is not common, but sometimes it is a good thing, and it makes sense to do, is even though you don't want to have, and you can't have binding language in there that says that this is definitely going to happen, you could do a letter of intent that says, hey, if we're a good fit a year from now, we are going to pursue this transaction, and it's, set forth in the letter of intent in Exhibit A. It's not a binding agreement, but it says, okay, we're going to get the practice valued. We're going to figure out or we're going to look at, CPA is going to tell us what the EBITDA is, and that it'll be valued as a 4 times multiple of EBITDA. And, the terms will be that you will buy 25%, now, and 25 more percent in 3 years. But like, you can lay out all that stuff. So I feel like in that case, it shows, even though it's not a contract, it's not binding on either side, it shows a bigger commitment to that ultimately. And I think it also shows that associate what this would look like. And, in that discussion you're having at the outset, that they understand it, they're interested. And so some of the mystery of what the partnership is going to mean to them has been taken away. Because even times people are like, yeah, they're going to, I've got this thing where they're going to let me partner. Okay, great. Like, how much you're going to buy? I don't know. Okay, 50% partner, 25% partner. I don't even talk about that. How's the practice going to be vetted? I don't know. Are you buying the real estate too, or just the practice? I don't know. Like, well, I mean, what is that? Like I'm a
Yeah.
partner. Great, congratulations. That means nothing. So
Yeah.
in order to get it so that it does mean something, there are just so many hoops that have to be jumped through that if they think that somebody is giving them clarity in the associate agreement, they're really, I'd be shocked if they were.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's a great idea. I never thought of that letter of intent, because I do think it shows the associate that the owner has intent to do
Mm-hmm.
this if it works out. But to your point, like I fired associates like a month after hiring them, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't hire the associate thinking to myself, I can't wait to fire this guy in 4 weeks. I hired the
Right.
associate thinking that this is going to be a good relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
then I got the wool pulled over my eyes or something like that. So
Yeah.
committing to some type of partnership agreement after 6 months or 12 months just kind of blows my mind. One
Mm-hmm.
final question that kind of goes along this. Um, a lot of times I'll have podcast listeners reach out and say, okay, I've been an associate of this practice for a year. The senior doc is offering me partnership and 4x EBITDA. They don't want to do a valuation. 4x EBITDA is what we're quoting. Um, but what about all the sweat equity that I put into this thing, right? So how do you advise clients on the difference between what the practice was valued at on day one of the associateship versus
Mm-hmm.
what's it valued at 365 days later? And is there a number? Do you just kind of go in the middle that the practice is actually worth?
Yeah. I mean, geez, that's really case by case. Yeah, I can make a good argument on both sides of that. As the practice owner, you're the one that had the risk. You had to borrow the money. The fact that the practice grew while you were, paying this person a good salary, they don't have any skin in the game. You're ultimately the one that's at risk. So if the if the practice increased in value because of your hard work and risk, then sure. I mean, as you know, like somebody that's in there producing dentistry and helping grow, like that's one aspect to helping grow and make the business more profitable. That's not the only one,
Right,
like that
right,
that dentist in there that did a lot of dentistry and made a lot of money by virtue of the fact that did a lot of dentistry. That's great. That's a contribution. That's not the contribution. So
right.
I think that's not all, like sometimes that sweat equity, like, hey, I'm buying my own goodwill. Yeah, kind of, but not really. Like you're still supplying them with all the patients. You've got the referral relationships, whatever the case may be. You're spending the money on marketing. You're bringing the patients in, whatever. You're training your staff, your team, everything. Like that's
Right.
sure. Like wouldn't it be nice sometimes, Jason, if you and I can both appreciate this? Just strolling in. Here I am. You know, I'm here to be a lawyer today. Here to be a dentist today. So long. Have a nice
Yeah,
weekend. Like
yeah,
how'd I
yeah,
go? Like so
yeah.
like
So
that
true,
that has
so
to be
true.
factored in. But I think from an associate's standpoint, like I think that's a reasonable conversation to have at the outset. Like, hey, after a year, man, I'm thinking about bringing you on as associate. Okay, that's cool. I mean, as a partner, rather, that's cool. Um, you know, uh, what do you think about maybe valuing the practice as of today? Okay, yeah, I might do that. Or no, I won't do that, but maybe let's look at it at 6 months. Like I'd be willing to do that because, as you know, for your listeners, anybody when you're valuing these practices, you could look at a snapshot in time at any point to say this is what the practice is worth. You're just looking at financials and at numbers. So there could be a compromise had there. But that's certainly, I think it's an appropriate conversation to have. And if you're an associate, you want to try to get that, take a shot at it. And again, not enforceable. So the fact that whether or not you are a partner, you can't make that happen because unless you have a contract, which we just talked about, you probably won't. And the practice owner doesn't have to honor whatever they said. If they say, yeah, we're going to value it as of today, and then a year later they say, well, I changed my mind. Well, I mean, you can't. There's nothing you can do about that other than maybe you should find somebody else to partner with because now somebody that you've shook hands on something with has retraded that key term. I
Yeah.
don't think unless there's some really really good reason, then you probably have been luckily put on notice that this is not the right place or the right opportunity for you.
Right. I mean, it's probably a blessing that you avoided a huge pothole in
Yeah.
your career by the seller or the owner doc kind of showing their true colors.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. Sort of like that's where that really sucks. And thank you for telling me who you are. I'll be on my way.
No question. No question. Well, Rob, again, thank you so much for the wisdom, for the knowledge, selfishly for answering a lot of the questions that are relevant to
Yeah.
me and my listeners and my coaching clients. Would love for you, if you're open to it, to just share some contact information. If people want to get a hold of you, pick your brain, entertain employing you as representation, how would that work?
Yeah, best way to reach us is our website, yourdentallawyer.com. You could submit a form there and let us know what you're looking for help with. And we do initial free consultations to talk about the opportunity, how we can help, and help provide some guidance there. So that's really the best way. And we have some content on our website as well. And then if you want to hear me talk with Dr. Nacho, we have our podcast as well that we talk about these sorts of issues in that show.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rob Montgomery.
Thank you. That wraps up another episode of the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. You have a choice today. Choose to be a lighthouse. Lighthouses are powerful and steadfast. They are beacons of light for others to reference when life gets turbulent. Go out into the world today and become a lighthouse for someone. Give more than you get. True joy comes from serving others. Start today. I'm Jason Tenori, your host. Thank you for listening to the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. For more information, podcast show notes, or links to anything that we have discussed today, please check out our website, thedentallighthouse.com. We would love to hear from you. If you would like to get on the show, please email us at podcast@thedentallighthouse.com.